In this video, we're going to pick up where we left off in part 1 by focusing on the between element of the analysis of variance statistical procedure. And this will focus on the variability between the different groups in our research question. So the first step is to calculate what's called a squared deviation for each group individually. And what this is, it's calculating the difference between each group average and the grand mean. And we'll do this for each group separately. So we're going to enter that value here into the cell beside squared deviation. So to calculate the squared deviation, we first have to calculate the deviation value. And so I'm going to hit the equal sign, and I want to calculate the difference between the average scores of the first group, and I'm going to subtract that from the average of the entire set of groups, and I'm going to hit enter. So here we see that the first group deviates from the overall average by 0.486 units, and it's a negative value indicating that it's less than the grand mean. But I need a squared deviation, so I'm going to go back up to the cell. I'm going to go back up to the formula. I'm going to go to the formula bar here, and in front of the B, I'm going to shift 9, and then I'm going to take my cursor to the end, and I'm going to close. I'm going to shift 0 rather, and I'm going to close the parenthesis, and I'm going to shift 6 for the symbol where I'm going to raise the difference to the power of 2. So I'm taking the deviation and I am squaring it, and I hit enter. So we have a squared value of 0.235. Now the next step here is to calculate the squared deviation for the rest of the group averages, but what I need to do first is I need to go back up to my formula bar, and I need to put the $sign, shift 4 in front of the G, and shift 4 in front of the 10. So what this will do, this will lock in the value in cell G10 when I drag the cell into the other columns for the squared deviation calculation. So I'm going to highlight this cell, grab the bottom right hand corner, and I'm going to hold the left mouse button down. I'm going to pull this over, and now I have the squared deviation values for each of the groups individually. The next step is to calculate the sum of squares for the between value, and so I'm just simply going to add up these scores. So I'm going to hit the equal sign. I'm going to use the Excel command of SUM. I'm going to shift 9, and I'm going to highlight all of these cells here, and I'm going to shift 0 and hit enter. So that will start the process where we will calculate the sum of squares of the between factor, but we need to make one adjustment to this. So if we go back to the right hand side to our equation for the sum of squares between, you'll see that we just completed the addition of adding up all of the squared deviations where each group average is taken, the difference between the group average and the grand mean is taken, but we now need to make an adjustment where we multiply the entire sum by the little n, which is the sample size in each group. Notice that this is not uppercase N. So I have to go back to make the cell active for sum of squares between. I'm going to go up to the formula bar, and so we have our sum of squares, and I'm going to shift 8, so I'm going to multiply this by the actual sample size. So I could just type in the number 7, or I can just click where I had calculated the sample size and hit enter. So that gives us a sum of squares between of 50.74. Now to calculate the degrees of freedom between, we go to our equation, which is k minus 1. K is the number of groups, and of course we have 5 groups. So I'm going to hit the equal sign. I'm going to type in the number 5. I'm going to subtract 1 dash 1, hit enter, and we have a degree of freedom for between of 4. The next step here, or the last step for calculating our between data, is what's called the mean square between. So we see over here on the far right hand side, the equation to calculate the mean square between is the sum of squares for the between factor divided by the associated degrees of freedom. And this is essentially a calculation of the variance between the groups. And then eventually what we'll do is we'll analyze the different variances in and among the data. But let's go ahead and calculate our mean square between. So I'm going to hit the equal sign, and I'm going to take my sum of squares between. I'm going to forward slash divide that by the degrees of freedom between, and I'm going to hit enter. And we have a variance between value of 12.68571. And so we're going to use this value down here to eventually calculate our test statistic, which is an F statistic, which is the ratio of two different variances. But we'll pick that up eventually here in the next set of videos.